Hello, everyone. Welcome to this week's patent webinar. Today, Matthew's going to be talking about patent strategy. This is going to kind of help you bring it all together in one cohesive package so that you understand. So thank you, Matt. I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Julie. So again, my name is Matt Grumbling. Matt at ntiplaw.com. If you have any questions at the end of this, or maybe even in the middle of it, you can just send me a quick email, and I'll try to get back to you. Today, we're going to try to bring everything together in a big cohesive patent strategy. Kind of a 30,000-foot level view of patent strategy. It's occurred to me as we've gone along through this one probably should have come at the beginning of this series. So if you feel like, if you watched, some of the previous ones and you're like, oh, thanks now, we'll try to give some guidance in the future on maybe doing this one earlier in the series. But the whole what I'm going to try to get at in this presentation is just to get a high level view of patent strategy. And a high level, I mean, we're not going to get granular on anything. We're going to take everything in very general terms. And so today's topics are, overall strategy, patent prosecution, patent licensing and cross-licensing, and patent enforcement. Again, and very, very high levels, and then working around other people's patents. Now, these are all important things. The overall strategy, first off, it's really important, whatever you're doing, that you have a strategy. In business, it's important to have a strategy for everything. I think a lot of people, for instance, were caught off guard by COVID. And why were they caught off guard? Well, because nobody planned for it. I mean, you can look at our government. You can see the government never planned for it, or at least they didn't plan very well. And I'm not speaking politically. I'm just saying that you can look all over the map. Every state had its issues. There's criticism all around. And I think, part of it is basically, in a sense, it was an unforeseeable event. Patent strategy is, thankfully, pretty foreseeable. And you should have a strategy. You should have a strategy for patents. You should have a strategy for trademarks. You should have a strategy for copyrights. You should have a strategy for confidential information. Basically, all these things are important. They're all components of intellectual property, just like you should have a strategy for real property. If you have a lease, well, how long is that lease? Why did you decide to have it that long? Why do you have a 6-year lease instead of a 2-year lease? And there are good arguments to make on each side of that, but you want to have an articulable strategy so that when you meet with investors or even just internally, so you're all on the same page, you can articulate your strategy. At the very least, if you decide to get patents, and I should say, even if your strategy is we're not going to get patents, you should have a strategy, and you should be able to articulate why you don't feel like you need patents. Maybe you're working in a field where it's not so much innovation that differentiates you; it's quality of product or quality of service. That's very valid, and that's it's a valid reason to that. There's maybe little innovation in your field, but and you differentiate based on quality or maybe price or whatever it is. But you should still be able to articulate that your strategy is we don't need patents, and here's why. A good example of that is I've used this before, but it's Lyft and Uber. When they started out in the providing their ride-sharing services, they didn't bother getting patents. They were moving too fast to slow down, and they frankly didn't have the money to do that. But they still had a strategy, and they were able to articulate it, and their investors bought into it. later on, they've since then circled back and started acquiring a lot of patents around around their space in order to now kind of shore up what they realized were holes in the patent strategy before. So anyhow, have a strategy, be able to articulate it with good reasoning, and that'll go a long ways to making investors happy. Provided that you decided to go along with getting patents, first thing you have to make sure is that you cover your product or service. And maybe it's both, but cover your product, and I'll just say product from here on out. It may be a service, but and that's valid too. But you'd be amazed at how many times patent applications get filed and prosecuted, and it turns out, when investors go to kick the tires, they find that the product isn't even covered by the claims, and you don't want to be there. That's not something you want to have to explain, and I would think that your patent attorney wouldn't want to have to explain that either. But you'd be surprised what happens in prosecution, because a lot of times the patent attorney is focused mostly on getting a patent, and not so much. And they should be focused on your business, but you as the business owner need to hold their feet to the fire, make sure that at least your product or service is covered before you start going out and try to throw a broader net and get in other people's faces. I will say also, one of the values of a patent is that, if certain conditions are met, you can actually keep other people off the market. It's called an injunction. That's really hard to do if your claims don't even cover your product, because then you don't really have an argument that the person you're trying to keep off the market is a competitor. And that's one of the elements of getting an injunction. So, for all sorts of reasons, you want to cover your product and service, product or service, at the very, very least. Then you want to think about covering potential competitors' products and services, throw that net a little bit broader, carve some space out around you so you have some competitive room. You've got some flexibility. You can maybe pivot if you're working on on that model, where you're thinking quickly, and you probably want to leave some wiggle room in there to pivot a little bit. Covering potential competitors' products and services requires broader claims, or you can try the picket fence approach. And then you can go for some, what I call bonus coverage, for things that are nice to have, and those are where you have maybe some out licensing opportunities. Maybe you're just working in an area, and your R&D folks came up with something that, in the long and short of it is, you're probably not going to commercialize it. Either you're undercapitalized to take advantage of the opportunity, or it's just outside your wheelhouse. But your R&D folks are smart, and they've come up with something really clever. You can look at out licensing those things, and you can get a revenue stream going, and that's not a bad thing to do. You can also think of partnering opportunities. Maybe you don't want to focus all of your energy on something, but maybe it's something with the right partner, you might be able to take that thing forward. So you have a lot of times you might have an IP that somebody else might find attractive, and you might be able to work out a situation where perhaps you get the ball rolling in terms of R&D, and then they go a little bit farther with the development part of it and marketing. So that's kind of your overall strategy. And I will say this is an iterative process. Your strategy today may not be your strategy a year from now, 2 years from now, 5 years from now. I don't think there's a single company out there that has the exact same strategy today they had 5 years ago. There's no successful companies. They're always going back, and and reimagining what their strategy is. And they're at least investigating, looking at it, saying to themselves, is this holding up over time? Or do we need to adjust? Do we need to pivot somehow? So the next thing is, I'm just going to go over through a few strategies, different types of strategies that that have been employed for patenting. I should say here that a lot of this is dependent on what's out there already, what the state of the art is. You're going to need to have a patentability search done probably to decide what your strategy will be, presuming that you go down the patent route. And this one I call narrow to broad, and just to give it a label. And I apologize ahead of time if any of you were not good with Venn diagrams when you were in school. I'm going to use Venn diagrams because I tend to think in them. And if you've got any suggestions for different ways to depict these ideas, please let me know. But I tend to think of patenting as an awful lot. It's analogous to real property, where you have basically dominant estates and subservient estates. So you have you have a landlord and a tenant, and who has what rights and whatnot. So I'm going to do this in a Venn diagram type of situation. And by narrow to broad, I mean let's say the whole thing, the whole green space there is invention space, and that's your narrow invention. That's enough right there. That little green spot right there is enough to cover what you do in your product or your service. Then you would think about in terms of broadening out from that, so that maybe you can take in some competitors' work, and maybe you broaden out even more, and maybe you continue to broaden out. So that's a strategy. It's a good strategy for patenting, because it allows you to focus first and foremost on your own business, and then to kind of go after maybe what competitors are doing or might do. If you can put on your far-seeing glasses into the future and see what they might do. Another strategy is the picket fence. Again, we're going to cover your product first, and that's right there in the middle. But then maybe this is a crowded technology. Maybe there's been a lot of work done. I used to do, when I was a patent examiner, I used to examine in an area that was dyeing cloth. And the cloth dyeing process was rather interesting, because there are certain types of, especially blue pigments, that are extremely difficult to dissolve or even to disperse in a liquid, and then to get to stick in it, evenly across a cloth surface or something like that. And you wouldn't believe how many patents there were on ways to prepare the dye in order to dye a cloth. And some of them would be grinded up with water and alcohol. And then the next one would be grinded up with water, alcohol, and acetone. And the next one would be, we'll grind it up with water, acetone, and alcohol, and throw some rocks into it while you're grinding it up. Seriously, I mean, it would be, there were rocks, and there were marbles, there were nails. They used 10-penny nails in one of them. I mean, it just became, after a while, I just couldn't believe that there were just so many different ways to do this, and they were all patented. So this is the picket fence strategy. So you get your original one, and then you start playing around. Your R&D folks start playing around. Maybe you get another one, and and then you get another one, and another one, and another one, another one. And after a while, it's going to get hard for your competitors to do what you do, or even get close to it, because you're going to map out a space here that is, and here I'm showing, with these additional concentric circles, you're going to see effectively with the picket fence strategy, you get that same narrow to broad type of coverage that you got with the previous one, because presumably these empty spaces out here are either things that flat out don't work, or that other people have patented and they're going to keep competitors out. So this is another strategy that you can use. This picket fence strategy is a nice one that you can use to to maximize your patent coverage. And the nice thing about these narrow patents is they tend to be rather easy to get. The broad ones are actually much harder. And why? Well, because every time you try to get a broad patent, somebody will have already done something that will, that will get in the way of getting that broad patent. But these narrow patents, you throw a lot of details into them. They become narrow, but they also become much easier to get. And so, you can imagine out here in these empty spaces here, there's a reason you filed these as narrowly as you did. There's probably some prior art out there that's keeping you from going there. But the combination of your patents and somebody else's patents are going to keep your competitors away from what you're really worried about, which is this inner circle here, this orange circle. So that's the picket fence strategy. Then there's the broad to narrow strategy. These tend to be for a platform type technology. I have to warn you though, they're very hard to get. The patent office will squeeze you between a rock and a hard place. The rock is the prior art, and the hard place is the description requirement. You have to describe your invention in precise terms, such that anybody skilled in the art could practice the full breadth of your claim. So if you have a claim that's very broad, and let's put up there's a very broad claim there. You map out a whole bunch of invention space. This is all mine. Imagine you're a rancher, in Oklahoma, and you mapped all that out. You'd have a hard time keeping all the squatters off of your land, right? There's going to be also, the squatters in this case are prior art that could pop up here or here or here and cause you to have to narrow your claim down. And also the description requirement. What if this is what you're claiming, but let's say you've only really enabled it so that somebody skilled in the art can practice this much, and you kind of leave this open to, you'd have to do a fair amount of research to enable all of this. That's going to narrow your claim. So, but let's presume for the moment that you're entitled to this broad claim, and that you're going to kind of own this platform. And then you can start to file. You can file improvement patents where, here's one, it overlaps with it to a certain degree, but then it maps out another space. That's nice. And here's a narrower one. Maybe this is this is kind of what you're really doing is down here in this corner. But now you've started off, you've kind of mapped out a much broader protection for yourself. And then here we are, down to your product right here. We could have done this in the opposite direction. The nice thing about this is if you get this broad claim here, theoretically, you're practically guaranteed to get this one here. I say practically, there's a risk. The risk is the examiner in the first case didn't do a very good job, didn't find all the prior art, and then maybe in one of the later cases finds something that should have been brought up a lot earlier and ends up knocking everything out. And so, generally speaking, we like the narrow to broad approach better. But this is, a lot of folks like the broad to narrow approach. And it's certainly when we're drafting claims, we think broad. We actually think both directions. When writing the claims, we think narrow to broad, but then when you file the application, and I'll show you that a little bit later on. Now, what if we have multiple aspects to your, maybe this is a multi-step process. And that's kind of the easiest way to imagine multiple aspects of a process. And you can get a patent on the entire process. The problem is a patent on the entire process conceptually is a very, very, very narrow patent. But what if you patent steps? Let's say that's your process. And you'd kind of like to cover that whole process, but actually conceptually, you can see that the area of that thing is not the area in the middle, it's the area around the edges, okay? That's kind of a small area that you're protecting with your process. So what do? Well, you start to cover steps. There's a step, 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 step. Now you got a bunch of steps. And now let's say you keep going and you get broader and broader. Let's say you go back and you file broader claims there. So, I've stepped through that very quickly, but you can see that if you cover that fairly quickly, or not quickly, but comprehensively, you can get a lot of coverage that fills in that hole in the middle here. And I think that's really, that's what you're really trying to get to when you're covering a multi-step process. You want to cover the whole process, but you don't want to have it so thin that somebody could just change one little aspect of it. So you hit every step, and by hitting every step, you can get broader coverage than you could have if you just patented the process by itself. That presumes that the multiple steps are patentable. They may be and they may not be. That depends an awful lot on what kind of results you get oftentimes. And presumably there's a reason that you're doing it the way you are. You probably have improved over prior art processes. So that's kind of strategy at a very high level. I'm going to talk just for a minute about patent prosecution. I covered this in a previous slide. This is going to be one slide that I'm going to work through rather than an entire deck. So, try, take heart. This isn't going to be a really boring thing on prosecution. But we start off in patent prosecution. We might start off with a provisional application. That's optional. You don't have to file a provisional application. You can go straight to a non-provisional. The advantages of a provisional application, there are two of them. One is you get an early filing date, and normally that's your core invention that you're going after there. That's going to cover at least your product, at least as you envision at the time of filing the application. So you get that early filing date. They're also less expensive because they don't get examined. So you just file, it's just a filing fee that you pay. I didn't put that in as a particular advantage, but it is an advantage. So you get that early filing date for a pretty low cost. And then you get additional effective term, at least for that core invention. So if it's, I'll give an example out of pharmaceuticals because I'm very familiar with those. Let's say you file a provisional application and it supports a claim for a brand new compound. You've essentially got, instead of the 20-year term you get for a non-provisional application, you get up to an extra year of coverage for that compound. And in the pharmaceutical industry, that could be worth $1 billion. So at least in sales, maybe a couple $100, $300 million in profits. That's a big deal. And pharmaceutical companies fight like cats and dogs over a few $100 million. So believe me, that effective term can make a big deal of difference. But it doesn't make a big deal of difference in every in every technology. If you get into computers and let's say internet-based apps, they can be here one day and gone the other. So getting an extra year of effective term isn't nearly as important as getting that patent out the door. So you might go straight to a non-provisional application in that case. And if you go to this non-provisional application directly, then you have all sorts of options open to you. You can request expedited processing. And I talked about that in a previous presentation. So the non-provisional application is what will effectively become a patent if it's allowed, and that application might describe multiple inventions. So if it describes multiple inventions, let's say there's a product involved, but there's also a process of making the product, and let's say there's also a process of using the product. And they might be of different scope. The process of making might be very narrow. The process of using might be kind of broad. It might even cover more than just, a particular product. So oftentimes the examiners will restrict the application to a single application. You'll have an opportunity to file one or more divisional applications to go after the other inventions that are described. Sometimes you're just forced into making an narrow claim, and it's a narrower than you wanted. But you're more interested in getting a patent today than you are in fighting with the examiner over the breadth of your claims or what the prior art says right now. So you take the amendment that the examiner suggests to get an allowance, and then you come back and you file what's called a continuation application. You take the exact same specification, and this is the important part here. There's no new matter allowed in either divisional or continuation applications. They have to be exactly the same specification as your original non-provisional application, but it has different claims in it because either the examiner restricted out part of what you disclosed, or because you took narrower claims in the earlier one and now you want to get broader claims in this case. And I'm speaking that in using a lot of generalities there. I don't want to kind of confuse you with a bunch of different scenarios. Those are the most likely scenarios for those two types of applications. It's also a specialized one. It's US only, really. It's a continuation in part. So, I just said that these require absolutely no new matter. Well, you can have new matter in a continuation in part. And what you do in a continuation in part is you add something. It's probably going to either be an improvement on the previous application, or it's going to be some detail that wasn't disclosed in the previous application. And the goal there is to get it'll be its own patent, but it will have the same term as your original non-provisional application. It will effectively expire on the same date if it's not extended or something like that. So those are the types of applications. You can also have improvement patents that are standalone. You don't have to file a continuation in part. And you're only allowed to file a continuation in part if number one, part of the specification is common between these two here. And at least one inventor is the same. What if you have one team of inventors invent your first application? You have another team of inventors come along later on, completely different, and they make an improvement. Well, that's going to be a standalone application. So this is where you might add on some bells and whistles. Maybe you find that your customers like they have certain preferences for certain things. You might add on bells and whistles there. Basically, any improvements that you can come up with. So here's the patent strategy. This is the patent acquisition strategy. We start off and we put in a broad claim. Oftentimes, examiners will say it's too broad. And I have multiple ways of saying it's too broad, but they'll basically communicate that the claim is too broad. So we start to narrow. And this could go a couple of rounds until we get down to something that the examiner feels comfortable allowing. Another way to do this is frankly to file narrow claims to start with, to bang it through the office really quickly, and then to start to add broadening amendments in continuations or continuations in part to try to broaden out the scope of our coverage. This works in, you have to keep in mind your overall patent strategy while you're doing this patent amendment strategy. And it's good to have it's great if your patent attorney actually helps you to develop your overall patent strategy to start with, so they know what they're doing when they get into prosecution. Again, that's why it's helpful to have an articulable patent strategy to start out. And as we keep going, we keep adding narrower, maybe, over time, we may find that we want to add something here that, these things here start to fit into this broader, these embodiments, we call them, fit into this broader scope of coverage. So let's talk for a minute about licensing and cross-licensing. Again, very high level. And there's some questions you want to ask yourself in this area. Are we working with a platform technology that maybe has multiple fields in it? So you might have some either out licensing or cross-licensing opportunities, some partnership opportunities for this. What is your differentiating technology? And what is your, and do you fit into like some sort of does your patent maybe fit into the enablement of some sort of standard? There's standard setting bodies out there, especially in electronics and computers, that, your patent might be enabling for that particular standard. And, a lot of times there are these patent pooling agreements between competitors or would-be competitors where they promise to cross-license in order to enable the technology. Things like, you could, Wi-Fi and Bluetooth are two that come to mind. But there are all sorts of these patent pooling agreements out there. And these have to be under what's called fair, reasonable, and non-discriminatory terms. So if you're in one of these patent pools, you basically agree that you're not going to save out some patent and really rake in the cash from that. You have to have what's called a FRAND or a RAND. Some folks use the fair and some drop it off, and it's just reasonable and non-discriminatory licensing terms. So the important thing here is, do you want a license? Do you want, let's say, if, for instance, your patent's broad enough to cover a number of different particular products and you just can't do them all, and they wouldn't be necessarily competing with your product. They might be complementary to it, or they might be, or they might just be far enough afield that you don't plan to work in that space. Can you make some additional money by licensing your enabling technology to somebody else? And so these are things to consider in licensing and cross-licensing. Finally, let's get into enforcement. Again, very high level. Enforcement usually starts off maybe with an offer for license, or maybe you skip straight to the cease and desist. And this again works in with your patent strategy. Do you want to make money from licensing others, or do you want people just to stay off your lawn? And that it can work either way, right? And I think about this in real world terms, people who live close to stadiums often will rent out parts of their front yard during game day. They make money from it. Others put a big sign out front saying no parking, and they wall it off, and they just don't want to be bothered with people parking on their lawn. You can have, you can use either one of those approaches in patents, but you need to know ahead of time which one you're really open to. And so a lot of times an enforcement may start off with this nice, gentle offer for a license, or it might not even be that. It might simply be, hey, did you realize, we noticed that you're working in this space, did you realize, and we have some interesting patents in that area. Very, very gentle, and then, no accusation that you're infringing or anything like that, but hey, did you notice this was there? Or they can go straight to, hey, we noticed you're doing this. This seems to be within the scope of our patent. Maybe we should talk about a license. Or it could just be a straight up cease and desist letter. We noticed that you're doing this. You're infringing our patents. And if you don't stop, we will take appropriate, we may take appropriate action. Something along that line. And the next step in enforcement may be an infringement action. Now, maybe your reason for filing an infringement action is really you straight up want them to cease and desist. You want an injunction from a judge saying, you competitor, you need to stop doing that. You need to stop right now and compensate the patent holder, you, for all that infringement. Or what you may be pushing for is to get a better licensing terms. So the infringement action can cut a couple of different ways. Again, you need to know going into it what can you tolerate. What's your optimum goal? Is your optimum goal to get a really nice royalty out of your competitor for using your license, or maybe non-competitive? Or is your goal really to keep them out of your space altogether? You should know that ahead of time. Because ultimately, most cases settle. I think I've seen estimates between 5 and 10% of patent cases actually go to trial, and most of them are settled. So, in the end, what's that settlement look like? It might look like they promise to stay off your lawn for a period of time, and then you let them in, later on. It may look like they're allowed on your lawn, but only on Sundays, and only between the hours of 3 and 5, or during, you understand what I'm saying, speaking by analogy purely. But, it might look like, they pay you a reasonable royalty if they make 100 units, and maybe if they make 1,000 units, they pay you a higher royalty. Or maybe it goes down with the number of units. It may depend on what the market looks like, market conditions and things like that, and really what do you want out of this, because you're the patent owner. So the last thing I'm going to talk about is working around a patent. What you need there is you need competitive intelligence. You need to know what others in your field are already doing. What do they have patents on? I see these things in like various online news sources that say, hey, Apple's coming up with this new thing. And how do we know that? We looked at their patents. And that's how you can, that's one of the ways. You can also check out trade journals, you can go to trade shows, you can, all these different ways of finding out what your competitors are doing. And then, but patent searching is definitely a big part of that, because you need to find out what they have patents on, or what they could get patents on. So you can search published patent applications to see what they've asked for, and then you search the patents to see what they've actually gotten from the patent office. So freedom to operate searching, that's what FTO stands for, is freedom to operate. That's super important. An initial FTO search is good. Better to have set up an automatic periodic update to that FTO search. Just put in the same search terms. You know, a lot of different platforms, Free Patents Online will do this. And I'm not sure about Google Patents, but I know Free Patents Online will allow you to put in a periodic update. A good day to do that is Friday. Why? Well, because patents, all U.S. patents issue on Tuesday, all U.S. patent applications issue on Thursday. So you can, or they don't issue, they publish on Thursday. So if you run your search on Friday, you'll catch everything for that week. You'll catch the patents from Tuesday, you'll catch the publications from Thursday, and you can do an inventor search. You can, it's like any other search. You can do an inventor search. You can do a claim search. You can do just mention anywhere in the spec type of search, and get a really good idea in real time, relatively real time, what your competitors are up to in the in their patenting endeavors. So at some point, you're probably going to want some sort of a non-infringement opinion. You're not going to need that really if you really are honestly working in a space where there's no innovation. You're only differentiated basically on your cost or your quality or your location. If it's truly a commoditized thing, that maybe quality makes a difference, but or maybe the cost makes a difference, etc. You probably don't need a non-infringement opinion. These can be either formal or informal. They can, if you had a patent attorney in-house, your patent attorney could just do a presentation to the board saying, look, we've checked this out. We've searched all the usual suspects. There's nothing to worry about here. That's an informal type of non-infringement opinion. If you start to, you start to see some activity very close to what you're doing from a competitor, and especially if they start making noise like offers for licenses or cease and desist letters, then you're going to want to go a more formal route. Another way to go is invalidity opinions, where you basically get your patent counsel to say that a patent is invalid for some reason, and therefore it's not enforceable. Again, there are formal and informal options. Again, if you're looking at the potential of litigation, you're going to want to go the formal route. So that's kind of the high level of working around. I'm not going to talk about too much about the actual mechanics of working around. Once you know what the patents are, how you go. That is so specific to each technology that it's not really practical for me to talk about it in this kind of forum. But your R&D folks should know what the patents are that they need to worry about, and they should be given guidance by a competent patent attorney or patent agent, probably a patent attorney in this case. What do they need to do to avoid infringing that patent? And they'll have questions. Well, what if we use this solvent instead of that solvent? What if we use this component instead of that component? Are we going to have freedom to operate? So that's all I have for today. I'm ready to turn this back over to Julie, and if there are any questions from anybody.
Doesn't look like we have any questions right now, but I want to thank everybody for attending. If you do have questions, or you missed part of this, or you just didn't take enough notes and you need to go back, this webinar is recorded, so you can go to the YouTube channel, Surprise Economic Development, and you can find it there. If you have questions, feel free to contact me, or you can contact Matthew and ask any questions, or his contact information was up there. And next week is the last in our series series of patents, and that is going to be patent diligence. And that is going to give you, Matthew's going to give you the idea of what investors want to see, which is very important if you're looking for investors, which most people with patents are. After that, we are going to jump into, in November, our Trademark Basics series. So there's some great ones. Look at the calendar and be sure to register. And Matthew, thank you again. And we'll see you next week.
See you then.